At this point, it appeared that Sharon was the only victim still alive at Cielo Drive. She was standing in front of the living room couch, facing the fireplace. Susan held her. Sharon was hysterical. I was alone in the house with Miss Tate and Sebring's body. Miss Tate continued to weep. I turned to her. "Shut up, you bitch, you're going to die." And she was talking to me, and I felt absolutely nothing for her as she begged for her life and for the life of her baby. I went over and grabbed her by the hand and put my arm around her neck. She begged me to let me have her sit down, and I was told before we even got there, no matter what they beg, don't give them any leeway. Anyway, I looked into her face, knowing that anything that I would say, I was saying to myself. "Woman, I have no mercy for you." And I knew at that time I was talking to myself. She said, "Please let me go. All I want to do is have my baby." At some point, Susan allowed Sharon to sit on the sofa. Meanwhile, Pat returned from the caretaker's cottage, told Tex that nobody was there, and went into the house to join Atkins and Tate. Watson joined them a few seconds later. I stood up and went back inside with Katie. He came back inside, and at that time Katie and I were standing by Sharon, and she was out of her mind. Immediately Tex was back in the room. "Kill her," he said. Sadie was sitting next to Sharon on the couch as the pathetic blonde woman sobbed, begging us to take her with us and let her have her baby before we killed her. It was the first time I'd realized she was pregnant, and for a moment it almost seemed like a good idea. But then Katie hissed, "Kill her," and Charlie's tape word, "Kill her," inside my head, and I looked at Sadie. I couldn't. In order to make a diversion so that Tex couldn't see that I couldn't kill her, I grabbed her hand and held her arms. I grabbed her and held the knife to her, but that's as far as I could go. "Kill her," he yelled. "I can't." She just sat there holding Sharon, so I reached out and made the first cut across her cheek. He snarled, "Get out of the way, then." He plunged the knife into her. Then I saw Sharon fall to the floor off the couch. Later, Prosecutor Bugliosi, because of some things Susan Sadie bragged about in jail in one of her attempts to get attention, was convinced that it was she who killed Sharon Tate, but his suspicion was not true. It was my hand that struck out over and over, until the cries of "Mother, Mother" stopped. Suddenly it seemed very quiet. It was over. I wondered why no one had heard the awful noises coming from the house, the gunshots, the screams. There was no explanation except one later given by the prosecuting attorney. The canyons play tricks with sounds, sometimes causing a soft sound to be heard distinctly a quarter mile away, while other loud sounds aren't heard a few yards away. We found ourselves whispering, "Are they all dead?" I asked. "Yes," Sadie replied. The three of us, Linda was gone again, looked quickly around the room. It was a shambles and blood was spattered everywhere. We left through the front door. We all went out the front door, and I saw Abigail Folger on the front lawn. Her nightgown was a see-through nightgown, and I saw blood on it, and I saw Tex go over and stab her 3 or 4, I don't know how many times. While he was doing that, Katie and I were looking for Linda, because she wasn't anywhere around. In fact, we started calling for her. We didn't want to call too loud, and then Tex walked over to Frykowski and kicked him in the head. Evidently he had moved, was still alive, and was still moving. Wojtek was almost super-heroic in his efforts to stay alive. He endured the most gruesome and vicious assault. Beatings, stabbings, shootings, kickings. In all, the Polish writer suffered 35 stab wounds and 2 gunshots, plus 23 blunt force beatings, abrasions, and defensive wounds. In summation, Stephen Parent was slashed with a knife and shot 4 times, all by Charles Tex Watson. Jay Sebring was shot and stabbed by Watson. Abigail Folger was stabbed by Patricia Krenwinkel and Tex. Frykowski was stabbed by Susan Atkins, beaten, stabbed, and shot by Tex. Sharon was stabbed by Watson. Tex was responsible for the fatal wounds of every person that night. We were almost to the gate when Tex said, "Did anybody write anything on the door?" "No, I forgot," I said. We had determined to leave a message that would recall the Hinman case and cause the police to suspect revolutionaries, probably black, and thus lead them to release Bobby. Then Tex told me to go back into the house and write something on the door in one of the victims' blood. I told Sadie, "Write something that will shock the world." I had previously been involved in something similar to this where I saw "Political Piggy" written on the wall, so that stuck very heavily in my mind. I didn't want to go back anywhere near the house, and so I just blanked my mind and walked into the house. Inside, I saw Sharon Tate on the floor. I knew I shouldn't use my fingers because of the possibility of prints, so I settled on the towel we had used on Frykowski. I walked over to Sharon Tate's body, and she seemed to have been cut up a lot more than when I had last seen her. I never actually saw her face. Her hair was covering her face, and there were sounds coming from her body, gurgling sounds like blood flowing into the body out of the heart. I knelt beside Miss Tate and dipped the end of the towel into her blood. It was still warm. My mind began to race madly. I thought of her baby. I picked up the towel and turned my head and touched her chest, and at the same time I knew she was pregnant, and I knew that there was a living being inside of that body, and I wanted to, but I didn't have the courage to go ahead and take it. When confiding in her fellow inmates later, Susan claimed to have tasted Sharon's blood. There is no evidence to support this vampiric claim. I took the blood-dipped towel and went to the front door. On the bottom section, I wrote the word pig. I held the towel in my hand and stood there for a few minutes. I did not know what to do. I turned around and threw the towel towards the living room area, towards where Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring were lying. Some reports say that Susan's blood-drenched white towel lay over Jay Sebring's face when he was discovered the next morning. To get out of the door, I had to step in blood with one foot, so I hopped on the other foot down to the grass and wiped my bare foot back and forth several times. I knew on the way down the hill that I had lost a knife. Then we were running down the driveway. Linda was gone, so I jammed my finger down on the automatic gate button, leaving a bloody fingerprint that would have been useful evidence if a policeman hadn't obliterated it the next day. Actually, several prints were left at the scene. Katie left a fingerprint at the pool gate, Sadie left bloody footprints on the porch, and Watson left his print on the gate button. I joined the others at the fence, and we climbed over and walked quickly and silently. Tex pushed the button that opened the front gate, and we proceeded to walk down the hill to the car. We found Linda at the car with the engine already started. Tex ran up to her and said, "What do you think you're doing? Get over on the passenger side. Don't do anything unless I tell you to do it." Katie had grabbed our extra clothes from the bushes, and we all tumbled in. Then we got in the car, and as we were driving, we changed our clothes. All of us were angry at Linda for having left us. She remained silent as we changed our clothes and drove away. I had a lot of blood on my clothes. As we hurried away, I suddenly remembered that Charlie had told us to go on to other houses until we had $600. I didn't have the strength to do anything but drive back to the ranch. Linda asked about the broken gun grip, and I told her I'd cracked it on the big guy's head. I lashed out at Sadie for losing her knife. Katie kept complaining that her hand hurt. Her knife hadn't had a proper handle, and she'd kept hitting bones when she struck. My head was aching terribly, and I reached my hand up to it. A large clutch of hair came away. Frykowski had battled with all his might. They complained about their heads, that the people were pulling their hair, and that their heads hurt. And Sadie said that when she was struggling with a big man, that he hit her in the head. Katie complained of her hand, that it hurt.